pledge, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all. We do have some items to address before we get into the topic of conversation tonight, so go ahead with the agenda, Kelly.
First is a resolution authorizing Supervisor Van Tassel to send written notice of agreement/disagreement to the Village of Cold Spring regarding their notice of intent to establish lead agency in regards to the proposed Fair Street drainage and sidewalk improvement project.
So this is just a procedural item. They're doing a restoration project on Fair Street for underground culverts, and I certainly don't want to be the lead agency on that. So we will certainly not, in my opinion, not resist if we can get a motion to allow the Village of Cold Spring to act as the lead agency in regards to proposed Fair Street drainage and sidewalk improvement project.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And I vote aye. Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming in. Welcome to the Town Board Workshop. So this is a working session of the Town Board and not a public hearing. It's not a debate about the proposed Fjord Trail. I'd like to thank the board for all the time and effort that they put into reviewing the DGEIS. So we will, this is my thought, we will accept public comment, but it will be at the end if time permits. We will be limiting to 2 minutes, and it will be specific to the document that's before us this evening. So, which we just received yesterday, so there shouldn't be a whole lot of prepared comments, so this is going to be specific about this evening's document. So I would just like to give a little background as to where we are right now. So the DGEIS was released by HHFT on December 4th. With a 60-day review period offered. We asked for an additional 60 days, and we received a 30-day extension, which extended the deadline to March 4th, which is 16 days from today. At the December 11th year-end meeting, the town board discussed 2 proposals that we had from 2 different engineering firms to review the DGEIS. We selected Tim Miller Associates, and Steve Marino is here this evening representing them. Also, per the recommendation of the town attorney, Steve Gaba, we requested the Conservation Board review the product as well. Andy Galler, the chairman of the Conservation Board, is here tonight. And my sincere thanks to Andy, the board, and to Max for the really wonderful professional results we had from you guys. So thank you so much, Andy. So we received both of these reports yesterday, and we forwarded it on to the town board. So before we get into it, I would just like to give you my view of what I spent hours going through the DGEIS. And during my review, I came to a simple conclusion, and I've said this before, that adding hundreds of thousands of new tourists to the community will have a negative impact on both the character of the town and the environment, no matter how you look at it. I have also learned that since I am not an industry professional, that my opinion is not heavily weighted. Therefore, having the Conservation Board and the professionals from Tim Miller Associates do a deep dive was needed. I first met with Steve Marino and Steve Gaba on January 30th. We compared notes of our review and began the production of the document that's before us. Steve Gaba's input has been included in Steve Marino's report. Yesterday, Bobby and I received the report from Steve Marino. We went through it briefly, made a few minor adjustments. I have the original, if anybody would like to see that as well. There was very small changes. And Steve, if you've read through it, Steve explained that the approach, which is chapter by chapter, is an industry standard review. You will note that there are several redundant topics, including but not limited to segmentation, environmental impact, community character and viewshed, permitting, which includes process, the status of permits, engineer drawings. There's also several mentions of the budget and sustainability, and also impact on local emergency services. So we have the document before us, and in order to get through it this evening, we will do an express version of similar to what we did yesterday. Steve, if you could come up If you guys have any questions at any point, that's what Steve's here for. We could go through, you can hit some high points. If there's any particular item that any of the town board members would like to address, we will do that as well. So, Steve, thank you.
Mr. Supervisor, first I'd like to just start with a little prepared kind of summary of where we are in the process and what we've looked at and some of the concerns we have just in going through the GEIS. Again, for the record, I'm Steve Marino. I'm the Principal and Senior Environmental Planner at Tim Miller Associates. I've been an environmental scientist for 40 years. I've been with TMA for 28 years. TMA was hired by the town board to review the GEIS for the Fjord Trail and assess the information provided and comment on whether this information was sufficient to make a determination of significance regarding whether the project would have a significant adverse impact on the environment, including traffic, community character, ecology, and the Hudson River. The draft comments that the board received from TMA are the result of a review by myself as the Wetlands and Natural Resources Specialist, Ann Cutignola, who's a certified land use planner in my office, and James Garofalo, who's a certified traffic planner. And as John mentioned, Steve Gabba's input as well, and we did have some discussions with the Conservation Board as well. These can be considered our recommended comments based on our many years of experience writing and reviewing environmental impact statements. To the extent we could, we dealt only with the parts of the trail that are within or contiguous to the town of Philipstown, since that's really our task here. Ultimately, any formal comment letter that's submitted to OPRHP as the lead agency will be the town board's comments, and I expect that there will be things to talk about this evening that will either be revised or added. A reminder that the final comment letter to OPRHP is due on March 4th. To summarize our review of the GEIS, we found there are a number of statements that are presented in the document without sufficient backup or detail. While we understand the concept of a generic impact statement, many of the issues of concern are put off until some future date when more detailed plans and data are available. One example is the discussion of the installation of pilings within the river. It's stated that barges may be used for the installation of the pilings, but no substantive data is provided describing the bottom sediments in the river, how those sediments will be contained, how deep the water needs to be for this method to be viable, whether the sediments in the preferred locations are possibly contaminated, etc. More than 400 pilings are proposed within the trail south, which is the part of the trail that runs through Philipstown, and we believe this information is crucially important to make a determination whether those potential impacts are unavoidable or can be mitigated. Another example is the analysis of visual impacts. Conclusions are reached about the changes to the view shed adjacent to the Philipstown section of the trail that don't seem to tell the whole story. The views from Fair Street near Mayor's Park and from 9D heading south from Breakneck toward the village will be significantly changed, but the DGEIS considers these changes not to be significant and not requiring mitigation. We suggested additional information, including photo simulations, cross-sections, and elevations may be needed to better prove this point. The information provided in the record is not adequate at this time. Traffic and visitation assumptions are complex and can be difficult to understand. The estimate of approximately 1,700 additional cars on a peak weekend day, or 300,000 to 400,000 new visitors per year may be accurate, but one article in the Sunday New York Times can double or triple that number, as the town has seen in the past. Not enough analysis was done of the capacity of the village and affected sections of the town to absorb that increase. Much of the detailed discussion about important aspects of the proposal is put off until some future date when other involved agencies, such as DEC, Army Corps, DOT, and others will review the applications with detailed plans. But their interests and concerns about this project are likely to be different than municipalities and the local residents. As you can see from these draft comments, a number of questions are raised about many aspects of the proposal. It was never our intent to come out for or against the project. The board may choose to do that at your discretion, but that was not our task here. This is a very complicated proposal with a number of possible long-term implications. It is our feeling that in some ways the presented DGEIS is too lacking in detail or so interested in moving the project forward that some aspects of the plan, especially the potential impacts to community character, congestion, and quality of life issues, are overlooked or downplayed without sufficient analysis or serious consideration of the long-term impacts to the community. And with that, I'll hand it back to Mr. Van Tassel.
Okay, so we can go line by line from your presentation. You guys want to do that, or how would you like to sound good? Yeah.
There's 16 pages of comments.
Yes.
It's totally up to you guys how you want to handle it. We can go through them one by one, or as John mentioned early on, we went through the book chapter by chapter in those chapters that affected Philipstown. We didn't look at Fjord Trail North, which is Breakneck to Beacon. You know, it doesn't affect the town specifically.
I took that whole section out.
Yeah, I mean, other than the traffic and transportation section, which certainly, is kind of, you can't separate the two for that part. But other than that, we did focus on the Fjord Trail South chapters of the EIS.
Can you just a little explain about the separation type of thing?
The segmentation part of it?
Segmentation, I'm sorry.
Okay. Segmentation is a term under SECRA where a large-scale project must be viewed as the overall project in some capacity. So, for example, we've done 500 acres of maybe a 200-lot subdivision. The actual action that's before the planning board at that time may be 100 acres of the property with 40 lots. But you can't take that 100 acres and look at it separately and say, well, we'll come back and look at the other 300 acres some other day. If it's the same owner of the property, it's the same development project, at least some cursory look at the rest of the project needs to be done. It can be just a concept plan, kind of a layout showing approximately how many lots or whatever would be available on that property, but you can't separate or segment that. The question we raise on this GEIS is the question of segmentation as it relates to the Fjord Trail North and South, the Breakneck Connector, which has already been through a SECRA process and approved at some level, and the Duchess Manor restoration, or conversion to offices and visitor center, et cetera. In our mind, those three pieces are all integral parts of one project, and therefore there's a question in our mind, which is best left to the legal eagles, but in my experience, that's just a question that comes up, is that whether that's segmentation by dividing it up into three separate approvals projects rather than one contiguous project.
Steve Gabel also highlighted that as segmentation as well.
So what is your feeling then about the impact of that on Philipstown, the segmentation?
Well,
Because
well,
it's
what it-
Dutchess County as
Right.
opposed
Well, what
to
it comes
Hudson.
down to is just that the GEIS didn't examine the kind of the big picture there. They looked at the Breakneck Connector, any work that's done there, the impacts to traffic and parking and anything else was not included in this GEIS, because basically in the GEIS they say, Breakneck Connector is already approved, it was a separate secret action, we're not going to talk about that. And that's just kind of, that's what I got out of that.
But how does that impact us?
It impacts us only in the fact that whether the secret process is appropriate as it's being conducted right now.
And if it were not segmented, there would be traffic and studies included
Right.
for getting to Duchess Manor, which certainly would affect the town.
Right, Duchess Manor as an example, it's a land use change, because obviously it's going to be a different use there now. An office space and visitor center may have different traffic implications than the restaurant that was there before. There's considerable clearing and grading associated with the parking lot, the expanded parking lot at Duchess Manor. There's trails that are being constructed to go down the slope to reach the Fjord Trail as it goes by Duchess Manor. So that's, another impact that should be at least evaluated as part of the big picture.
I thought your presentation was a good summary, and I think it would be helpful to go through the document, the rest of it.
Yeah, it's still just a clarification. So the Breakneck Connector and Bridge, that's one issue you're saying that could be segmentation, and that went through its own secret process, right, separately. And I think the argument there was that it had utility in and of itself. So that went through its own secret process. And then you're saying the Duchess Manor part of the project went through its own secret process as well?
As I understand it, it's going through its own secret process now in the town of Fishkill.
Got you.
And so it wasn't included in the GEIS, other
And then
than
the Fjord Trail
mention of
North
it.
and South, that is all part of this
That's all part of this,
DGEIS.
yes.
So it's just the Duchess Manor and the Breakneck Connector
Right.
Bridge. And the concern would be that the impacts tied to those projects wouldn't be considered in Fjord Trail North and Fjord
Right,
Trail
aren't
South.
evaluated as part of the big picture for the project.
As far as I know, the bid documents are going out shortly for the Breakneck Connector, so obviously it's been through that process.
Got you.
So,
I mean, I know that there were utility issues and DEP issues and such that went into that assessment, but the construction of the bridge across the tracks, all that clearly is an integral part of the Fjord Trail as a whole. So, and again, it may not in the actual impact assessment, it may turn out to be that that everything works and there wasn't an adverse impact, but there's no opportunity to evaluate that because.
Thank you, thanks.
So Steve, there's several mentions of environmental impact. Can you just touch on a few, that is your expertise, obviously, as to, the effect of it in the river, on aquatic life, on the health of the river itself?
Well, and as I mentioned in my initial presentation, one of our main concerns about the trail south is the amount of work that's going on in the river. There are over 400 pilings proposed within the river itself because they can't get the separation from the tracks that they need. I guess there's a minimum of 25 feet, and then you have, the historic stone and riprap that's there. So in order for them to get the trail in for that 1.7-mile section, they need to get in the river. And there are a number of issues with working in the river that, we don't feel were looked at in enough detail in the GEIS. Again, with proper mitigation and proper assessment, maybe that's not an issue. Maybe it's not an impact. But again, it's in our mind that the information provided in the EIS is just a little too vague to be able to make that determination. So like I said, there's the question of, one of the discussions is about using barges to come right up to the edge of the riverbank with cranes and/or heavy machinery on top of the barge in order to use helical drilling or other methods of constructing the pilings. There's no mention of how deep they have to go before they hit bedrock in order to set those. There's no discussion about the condition of the sediments along that edge of the river, whether they're contaminated or not. As we know, over the years, between the cadmium we had and such down at Constitution Marsh and the issues they've had upriver with PCBs, we don't know what's in that sediment, and there's no discussion of it in the EIS.
Is there any presented budget for containment and control of the hazardous
No,
material?
there's not. There's actually no discussion about if the sediments are, that I could find. I have to qualify, this is 709 pages before you got to the appendices. Right. So, there was no mention there that we could find as to how, if contaminants are found in that sediment, how that would be dealt with and what the budget, how that would be budgeted, who would take care of that.
I have a quick question. How would that impact the railroad, the MTA? Like you're talking about barges coming up. Like how would that impact? It's a very clear question. How would that impact
and the question
MTA?
that comes up repeatedly in my comments and in our review of the EIS was, there's a lot of mention that MTA is, most of the section, the south section, would be on MTA property. And there's discussion about MTA was part of the early discussions, the steering committee, as they called it, when this was first looked at. But there's been nothing that I could find, any subsequent discussions with MTA, any correspondence from MTA in the EIS suggesting that they are for or against or find, things are appropriate to do on their properties or, and that's a question we ask is, has there been any further discussions with MTA? Is there any correspondence from MTA suggesting that the layout as currently, shown on the plans is appropriate? And we don't know. So they're talking about in the future, they'll have more discussions with MTA and at some point get a permit. But we don't know what a permit is for because we don't have any plans.
Just a follow-up question. So how would that impact then Mayor's Park? Like how would this impact Mayor's Park and then the river that goes up against the railroad and then the marsh? Like it's a disaster down there right now because they're waiting for funds. So
yeah, but the thing about Mayor's Park that we came across is that, as you know, when you walk up and down Fair Street and you look through Mayor's Park, there's the river, there's the mountains there. Yeah. The proposal as it's currently shown in the document is that the boardwalk itself will be 4 feet higher than the train tracks on the west side of the tracks, 4 feet higher than the tracks. And then there'll be an 8 to 12 foot high fence above that. So we're talking about somewhere between 12 and 16 feet above the existing elevation of the train tracks would be the path itself and the fence. And we don't know if that's going to be a significant, to me, I've lived here 35 years.
likewise.
Looking over, you see the river now, you wouldn't see the river then.
Right.
Okay.
And the people that live there that worked really hard to purchase those homes.
But as far as that goes, what we're asking for is more details. We want a cross-section.
Yeah.
They can give us a cross-section. They can give us an elevation of what the actual tracks and fence look like at that location.
Yeah. Which would be nice to see.
The picture they give in the document of Fair Street and Mayor's Park is this big. And it's, you know, it's out of focus, and I think a photo simulation of some sort and a better idea of what it's actually going to look like before a final determination can be made, you know, is appropriate.
Can I ask another question about definitions, Steve? Because throughout the document and in other documents I've seen, the term community character is going to be impacted. Can you or review that term and what it means in your mind as far as environmentally, the community character?
Yeah,
What the
community
definition is?
Community character in this under seeker is really whatever the local community and whatever the planning board or whatever agency that's approving the plan determines it to be. I mean, some of these terms are kind of loosely defined, and the lead agency gets to determine what community character is. But generally, it's, you know, whether it's an increase in traffic, an increase in congestion, changes in land uses, residential uses being converted to businesses, home ownership being converted to rentals, any of that kind of thing could be looked at under community character. Viewshed also. Traffic, again, traffic and congestion is considered under community character. But there's no definition of this is community character and this isn't. This is an adverse impact to community character or it's not. It's really up to the local municipalities to determine that. I've worked on 200 lot subdivisions where the planning board checks it off as a negative declaration. And I've worked on 3 lot subdivisions where you have to go to a positive declaration and an impact statement. So it really is up to the local communities to determine environmental, you know, impact significance.
And the way it's currently proposed, because of State Park's label on it, there will not be that review by our planning board.
Well, that is a question, and that's a question we also pose, and I'd like to get some, at some point, maybe Steve Gaba could look at that and see if, what the impacts associated with that are. While much of the project is going to be happening on OPRHP property, the actual applicant is a private entity, and the project will be privately funded. So I don't know if that is an avenue for the local municipalities to have some kind of site plan review available for the local planning board for those aspects that are within their municipality. The Washburn parking lot, expansion of the Washburn lot is one that comes to mind in terms of whether that's something the local community would have at least some site plan approval over. Location of the restrooms, you know, may also be one. There, again, it mentions restrooms, but it doesn't mention where the restroom's going to be, other than at the parking lot, at the parking lot by Breakneck, or at the parking lot by Washburn, there'll be a restroom. There's not much description of size. They say we'll either use septic systems or we won't. We'll drill a well, or we'll provide hand sanitizer. And generally, in my experience, that's not enough detail for an EIS to really move forward without more.
I understand that's not enough detail for the DGEIS to move forward, but with this applicant, they have developed the West Point Foundry Park and Trail. There are restrooms there, there are sanitizers. So, I mean, I know there are not hundreds of thousands of people going there, but there are tourists going there.
Yeah,
And that seems manageable.
Yeah. And again,
That trail
I think-
passes that way less.
it's very important to, again, we're not saying that they can't do it, or that it's not a good idea, or that it won't work. We're just saying that based on the information that's provided, we're not sure. And that more detail needs to be provided in order to be able to make that assessment.
Steve, a few times you made a couple points in the memo related to kind of a lack of detail in the DGEIS. I mean, one was pilings, one was roundabout, one was the restrooms, one was kind of site plan for parking. So based on your experience, because I don't know this process very well, based on your experience with large projects, are you making those points because you would expect to see that level of detail in the DGEIS usually? And what are the concerns? Just kind of explain to us as this process goes forward, public comment closes, and then there's a lead agency review, and they kind of look at creating the final environmental impact statement where, you know, the DGEIS says a lot more of this detail is going to be provided. But that kind of is outside of public review or public comment. Can you just talk a little bit about that based on your experience, why you think there's not enough detail and what happens after
Well,
this?
what's going to happen with the board's comments. Once we assemble the board's comments, Conservation Board's comments, we'll most likely convert that into one large document of comments. That will be submitted to OPRHP as the lead agency. They will receive those comments as they will receive comments from the Village of Cold Spring, as they will from the Town of Fishkill, many other many other agencies, local community groups, individuals that are commenting. And at some point in the future, they will put together an FGEIS, the final generic impact statement, and they will have to go through line by line and respond to each of those comments. So we're asking for, like in the view shed analysis, we're asking for additional information, cross sections and photo simulations. At some point, they will be bound to respond to that question. They may say, no, we don't think that's necessary, and it'll be up to the lead agency to decide if that's true or not. They have the final say in the approval process. But they will have to address each one of those comments, and you know, from what we're seeing so far, there are probably several thousand comments before all is said and done that they will have. The FGEIS will likely be as large as the DGEIS by the time they're done with the comments that they have to address.
So if, let's say, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. So if you put a comment in that says it would be great to have more detailed information on the pilings going into the Hudson River so you could make a determination, people could have a, does that, let's say the lead agency says, yes, we want that information on the 400 pilings, that goes into the final environmental impact statement. Is there any more review for local municipalities or community groups at that time after that detailed information?
Public hearing is always required for the draft environmental impact statement.
Yep.
Final environmental impact statement, the public hearing is optional.
Okay.
So the lead agency will determine at some point in the future whether they think it's appropriate to have additional public comment on the EIS. Now, another thing that happens with a generic impact statement is a generic impact statement is kind of a concept plan, and that's, you know, again, one of our issues with this. They talk about very specific plans and as to how this is going to work, but then they call it a generic impact statement. What typically happens with a generic impact statement is certain thresholds are established in the final impact statement. Essentially, if you're talking about like the amount of land that's going to be, or let's talk about the pilings in the river. You say you need 438 pilings in the river. We've determined that 438 pilings in the river will not be a significant adverse impact. This is the lead agency talking. If you come back one day and say, oh, we need 500, not 400, then that doesn't meet that threshold of 400, they would have to go back for additional secret review in terms of what's called a supplemental impact statement. Now, there is a question as to whether the supplemental impact statement will open up public comment again for the increased impacts associated with whatever triggered that supplemental. And that is a question we ask, is if there's a supplemental required, will the public have an opportunity to comment on that and review that as well? Thank you. But so like I say, the generic impact statement establishes thresholds. You can't put in any more than 400 pilings or that's a different impact. 400 is acceptable, 500 may not be, we'll have to look at that. You can clear 12 acres of trees. If you come back and say we need to clear 15 acres of trees, you have to come back. But in terms of the generic impact statement, again, generally, typically, a little bit more information, a little bit more detail is provided because, again, going back to the parking lots as an example, several parking lots are proposed, but we don't have a plan for those parking lots. So we don't know, is it an acre, is it 2 acres, is it 100 trees, is it 500 trees? We don't really have enough information to evaluate whether it is an impact or not. They may have found a location for the what do they call it, Notch Hill? The Notch Hill parking lot. They may have found a location where they only have to cut 8 trees down. Well, if that's the case, that's a very minimal impact. But we don't know that because we don't know what that land looks like. We don't have that information. As you know, on the east side, particularly on the east side of 9D, the land, the topography is challenging at best, and it's rock. And how much land are they going to have to actually clear? How much grading is going to be involved? Are they going to have to blast in order to flatten that land out? We don't know because we don't have that information.
And traditionally, in a normal project, there would be that detail
Yes.
in the DGIS.
Yeah. Or at least some kind of a concept plan saying, this is what we think it's going to be. And then the lead agency can say, okay, that's what you think it's going to be. If you go over that, you may need to come back.
Is this, I mean, is the lack of detail just because of the volume of the
I
work?
would expect that that's so.
Right.
You know,
Because-
again, they got 700 pages of some detail, but some details missing. You can imagine if there was, you know, every inch by inch of the trail going, you know, south to north would be an extensive, but I think that's kind of what, considering the scale of this project and what we're expecting it may end up being to the communities on both ends of it, you have to wonder if that wasn't warranted to do that.
I have a quick question, Steve, sorry. Is handicap accessible? Is that in this proposal? Is this like,
It is
does that
expect-
take more trees down, or does
It is
that put
expected to
more
be ADA.
bathroom, put more restrooms
think,
along
well,
the way?
I think the access to the trail
Yeah.
is probably a minimal impact, because there are already some entrances, some like Little Stony Point and some other areas where you can get to where this trail is going to be. And they're creating these meanders, as they call it in the document, which will be trails that will lead down to. And there are certain, I can't tell you specifically what
I know.
what the grade restrictions are and how wide it needs to be. But I think access and the ADA part of it is doable without a significant impact.
Okay.
My concern about the ADA part
It's a big
is, you know, they're proposing a trail that's 10 to 14 feet wide, although they do talk about at the most sensitive areas, it'll only be 10 feet wide. And we do raise the concern about, well, is 10 feet wide enough for bicycles, assuming wheelchairs, baby carriages, and pedestrians, you know, going north and south, if that's a safe situation. And I'd like for them to say, we've looked into this, and this is why we think it's safe. And you know, there are sections of the trail that are going to be metal graded so that water can get through. But is that really something that's conducive to bicycle riding or wheelchair? And again, questions. It's not,
No,
we're not saying
I mean-
no, that it's not going to work. We just have questions before we can come to that conclusion.
Do you know, Steve, in your experience, whether the greenway that's all along the Hudson River in Westchester County, if that's gone through a similar DGEIS process? And
Judy, I don't know.
You don't know,
I don't know.
okay.
I know that generally those are on abandoned railways, and, you know, they pave, you know, 12 to 15, 16, 18. I mean, I've been on the trail in Somers, over at Baldwin Place, and that's, you know, it's 20 feet wide and asphalt, and flat as can be because it was an old trail, an old rail line. So,
Like the Walkway of the Hudson, which is
Yeah.
an existing structure, right.
Thank you.
Go ahead. If you could just, budget sustainability and concerns about the budget and maintenance, permanent maintenance on the trail.
let's talk, let me see if I can
Who's
find
gonna,
something specific to that.
maintain really large trail. I'm sorry,
We had talked about the private funding donations is how it's going to be based, and the number of employees that are projected to be working.
I think they said 79 employees.
Yeah, it's a number, but for some reason, like 7 or 8.
and there'll be enough funding to maintain these employees for the longevity of,
That's what I'm trying, I do have that in here somewhere, I just
I
want to
know
find
it's a
it.
lot to go through.
Yeah.
Your notes, or if it was in your planner's notes.
Seems like a lot of money.
One comment is on,
Socioeconomic,
Wish I paged that.
socioeconomics.
yep, but there's one comment about their narrative in the document says that HHFT is self-funded through private charitable donations. This includes an endowment which is being scaled up as the project develops. The endowment will help cover annual operational costs as well as long-term capital repair and replacement costs. In addition, HHFT Incorporated will fundraise on an annual basis to support its yearly operating budget. Parking fees would also be considered and may provide operating revenue. Like, for one, they say the endowment will help cover annual operation costs, but doesn't say it will cover operational costs. So our comment is, please provide additional information about the expected budgeting and overall cost of the trail, including the potential for financial contributions from New York State, OPRHP, and taxpayers.
Yeah, because at the end of the day,
Yeah,
taxpayers have to end
and
up.
maybe they have a way of saying that we don't think that'll ever happen, and
Yeah,
again, we need to know that.
absolutely. I think taxpayers
board needs to
alone
know
need-
that.
Well, the taxpayers
The
of
board
this
needs-
community
not we.
need to know
No,
that as well.
We need. Let's see.
And then, one thing that I obviously harped on for years, is the additional load on the emergency services in the town of Philipstown that are subsidized by the town of Philipstown. The projections easily double the population of the town on some days and even further on other days. I, as the budget officer, cannot budget enough money to cover that doubling of the population by any means. So I would have proposed at some point that they would provide their own BLS service as well as security and a rescue team.
On the final page, the last paragraph actually, which is Chapter 4, Section N, Emergency and Public Services.
Yep.
Our comment is, it seems obvious that adding thousands of people and vehicles to the village and Route 9D corridor will result in an increased demand on EMS, fire, and police services. DGEIS concedes that increased visitation, not vegetation, would potentially increase demand on emergency service providers, although it denies that this would result in any significant adverse impact on police, fire, and medical providers. Mitigation for the increased demand must be proposed and considered if the trail is to move forward. Provision of private EMS staff on site and private security would be a start. So that's
Right,
how.
I mean, at least dawn to dusk while the park is open, my feeling is they should be providing their own EMS service to the trail.
They
The
did
town is not in a position.
dawn to dusk for 3 seasons. In the winter, apparently, it's going to be closed.
Right.
Or, no, not necessarily closed. It'll be open, but it won't be shoveled or plowed. So access, the parking lots will be plowed, but the trail itself won't be plowed. Now, I don't know, because of the section from Cold Spring to Breakneck is going to be over the river. That's expected to be constructed so that water can get through it. Maybe the snow won't pile up on it. I don't know. But again, if it's open and it's not shoveled, the need for emergency services may come up.
Maybe more.
And again, I don't have the knowledge of elsewhere in New York State on trails what the emergency services arrangements are. I mean, are you aware of our Fishkill? Is Fishkill?
I'm not, Judy, but we can certainly look into it.
Okay. And other towns that have similar trails?
Rail trails and those different, yeah.
Yes.
But all those towns, don't they have paid fire departments and paid ambulance? Like, we are volunteer.
Not all.
Not all of them, okay.
Beacon has a paid
Paid
firehouse.
firehouse,
right?
and-
They're a combination department, but again, we're gonna focus on.
No, I know, I'm just trying to make a point to Judy's statement that Philipstown is volunteer.
Many of
We're
those
all
are now part of the
volunteer.
Empire State Trail, and so I don't know if the state provides additional funding to the localities in order to help with the security and EMS, but we can certainly look into that.
We did request a statement from the Bureau of Emergency Services, and they, along with the county, are submitting a statement to the project as well. So
But State Parks is the lead agency, so they would have some responsibility too, wouldn't they, for
we'd hope.
making sure that emergency services are available?
Or that they're somehow, that somebody's, they're thinking about it at least, that there's some, if the state parks eventually approves this plan and makes some kind of an agreement with Hudson Highlands Fjord Trail, you would think that in the conditions of that agreement or that approval, there'd be some provision for how emergency services and
I can
police
tell you
are gonna
firsthand
work.
that recently they have improved their responses to emergencies on Breakneck, but prior to, the last 4 or 5 years, there was little to no assistance. So the local emergency services have been tasked with bringing people off of the mountain. You can't say no, it's our responsibility to respond if there's an emergency, but, and I don't think it's fair that our emergency services that we fund with tax dollars should be first due to a park that's being privately built and approved by New York State Parks. If they're proposing to double the population of the town of Philipstown on many days of the year, then they should be doubling the services that are provided. Our emergency responders should not be taxed with, or the taxpayers of Philipstown should not be taxed with a New York State park. So it'd be no different if somebody were to come in and do an amusement park. They would have to provide emergency services. There is a figure that Bureau of Emergency Services is proposing based on events, like if you have a large event somewhere, a concert or something, for every 5,000 people, you need this. So that is included in their report, so.
And I know in states across the country, because I've hiked trails outside of New York, they work together to make that a reality. But yeah, there has to be, of course, an agreement and
Right, it's like
funding.
if
But
you go-
it's,
Right.
you know, it's happening. It's not like it's anything new.
Yeah.
If you go to a
Hasn't
ski area, the ski patrol takes
Right.
care of the mountain, they package the patient, bring the patient to the road, and then it's transported.
And you would think that OPRHP at some point would get together with the local services, emergency services and whoever, and figure out how that's gonna work. And try to convince them that additional funding is gonna be required in order to make that work.
And I don't know in our case that funding is the answer, because our emergency services are tapped to the point that we're vulnerable now. So I don't know if money or equipment is the answer. I think providing a service is the answer, so.
Which is why we suggest, private EMS, private
Right.
security as an option, as a possibility that should be thought about.
I'm more than happy to be mutual aid.
Right.
We've been doing it for years. It'd be nice if they provided mutual aid to us now, so.
There was another issue that came up regarding, I'm sorry, Jason.
No, I was gonna ask a question about phasing, but I wanted to make sure everybody, the emergency services
Yeah.
was, so this came up a number of times, Steve, and it seems to be kind of one of the central issues, is just the phasing of the project. It kind of is gonna come up when I know the Conservation Board presents their memo. And I know that Supervisor Van Tassel was in a lot of discussions for a long time, that kind of came to this position, and there was some correspondence with the Hudson Highlands Fjord Trail about kind of a negotiated point of saying, okay, let's build the trail, up until the point of Little Stony Point.
Still support.
Right, and I think you've been public about that, we've discussed that. And get to see, based on real data, if in fact the trail is doing what it says it's gonna do by building this trail and drawing people out of Cold Spring, it's helping with current visitation, traffic issues. And so I guess the question would be, is there a way to build, if that's kind of an agreed position between the local towns and villages and the Hudson Highlands Fjord Trail, is there a way to suggest a changing of the phasing plan? Because currently, Phase 4 runs from 2026 to 2031, and that is the whole part of starting kind of Fjord Trail South. And wouldn't it make more sense if that was kind of the agreed upon position to create a new phase, like Phase 5, which is the beginning of Little Stony Point to Dockside based on a review of real data? And is there a way to kind of memorialize that in a way that respects that position that's been come to? Move back that timeline. And at the same time, I would kind of add that, I think you raised this, that if we are going to test whether or not these mitigations are helping with all the visitors we're getting, which is kind of one of the primary goals you point out, can we also suggest that all of the mitigations, like the parking lots and the meanders and the signage and all of that, gets put into earlier phases than Phase 5? So there's a way to test whether or not those strategies are working and whether or not people are in support at that time of continuing the trail down into Cold Spring.
That's often a part of of the thresholds that I was talking about before with generic impact statements. It's often, there are landmarks where after a certain amount of time and a certain phase is completed, and another assessment of, say, traffic is done. If the analysis that was done for traffic says that on a given day, based on this part of the trail, there will be 600 new cars, then if they get, when that part of the trail is completed, when that phase is completed, an assessment would be done. Yes, 600 cars was right. It's actually 500 cars. It's not as many. Then you move on to the next phase. Then you move on to that next threshold. And we do bring up that point that I've never seen before a phasing plan where all 4 phases are at the same time. It is kind of unusual to have that happen. Phase 4, starting in 2026, is at the same. I think Phase 3 may start in 2027. But the first 2 phases start immediately next year, as does Phase 4. And what we're suggesting is just what you mentioned. Breakneck to Beacon, maybe Breakneck to Beacon is 4 parking lots associated with that, between Dutchess Manor and the park and Notch Hill and what's going on up in Beacon. There are 4 parking lots associated just with that part. Why not build that part first, see what the traffic does, see how things shake out, and then think about coming, further south, maybe to Little Stony Point, and then assessing it again.
As much as I support, I don't know if we have, I mean, you're the expert. Do we have that, can we make that
No.
suggestion in this?
We
And
can
that-
make the suggestion.
Right.
We
And
can't make them do
obviously, we
it.
don't have control over it.
We don't have approval authority, so
Right.
we can't make them do it, but we can, but you, I don't mean to say we, keeps coming out that way. You can't make them do that, but you have every right to make the suggestion and kind of lean on Parks Department in terms of, that question needs to be answered, and it needs to be answered.
Why does it all have to be done? What's the rush? I don't, like,
Well, I mean,
why?
honestly, obviously,
No,
the
that's
concept,
what you- I'm just
yeah,
saying,
no, the
no, no,
concept
no.
in the GEIS is from Cold Spring to Beacon, and, that's the concept for the,
Dockside to
that's the, the action that's being proposed.
Well, it says here, construction 5 to 6 years, right? Is that the overall plan for the whole entire thing?
Yeah, I think
Well, if you read
I think they were
the-
expecting it to be in full operation by 2032.
The top-down construction section said 5 seasons, and it's
Yeah.
summertime only, so, and top-down is the section between Little Stony
Yeah.
Point and Dockside,
And Dockside.
which is on the water.
On the water.
So that's a 5-year construction period.
Because it takes time to.
So there's 5 years of
To do
drilling.
the pilings, especially with the top-down method, it takes time to, they have to put 2 in, build that section of deck,
And go
move
out.
the machinery out, and
Right.
put 2 more in, and, yeah. And, that comes up in the noise section as well, because,
Yeah, that's what I thought.
heavy machinery, everything right out there in the river.
So getting back to the, boardwalk per se, if you got to be 25 feet from the tracks, right?
Going into the river?
Into the river,
Mm-hmm.
and this is 12 to 14 feet wide. All right, so theoretically, this is almost 40 feet away from the shoreline.
Like the middle of-
Well, the tracks aren't on the water right now. If the tracks were right, yeah.
But still, it's out there. It's quite a
Yeah.
distance.
Yeah, I mean, it's gonna be, it'll be at a minimum, it'll be 16 feet of river that will be covered with this structure.
With concrete in the river? to
Well, that's the
build-
other thing, is that, yeah, once they bore the holes for the pilings, then those pilings will be filled with concrete. And that's another question we ask is, well, how are you gonna contain the concrete? How are there not gonna be accidents, the river? Again, our village lives for the river. The river is there, that's why we're here, and,
Yes, I will.
and, so we wanna make sure that every one of these little details that has to do with the river and possible contamination and possible,
Few of our
impacts.
communities, the river.
I'm just gonna revisit this question of landmarks, just to get it right. So you're saying this is the good point in the DGEIS for the town board, maybe with advice from you, to come up with those sorts of landmarks that we would recommend would be tied into the decision whether or not to continue Little Stony Point to Dockside?
We can certainly,
Well, we can
you can certainly suggest any of that as a comment, because, we specifically
Like if
identify
parking
the
reaches
phasing
over
plan.
capacity, or if the annual visitor growth rate goes above the assumed amount, this is the time to make those sorts of suggestions?
Yep. And by making that suggestion, they have to answer in some detail as to whether they can or can't, or why that works or doesn't work. And then that'll be part of the record, and then when OPRHP makes their findings and says, we're approving this because of this, or we're not approving it, at least it's all in the record then, at that point.
Steve, sorry, I have another question.
Sure.
The traffic study, when was that conducted? Because I'm curious to know if anybody has driven from Cold Spring to Beacon in a beautiful October day, what usually takes 12 minutes, and I'm there 5 days a week, takes me 12 minutes to get to Cold Spring to Beacon. But in October, on a Saturday afternoon, it takes almost 35 to 40 minutes. So what's the traffic study, and when did they conduct that?
I would have to get back to you with that information. My traffic guy
The
did.
traffic study in
did look at
February
that.
on a Monday
Right,
is
and I
going to be
think he
very
asked that-
different.
He asked that
than-
specific question about pedestrian vehicle counts.
Yeah.
When were they done? What were the weather conditions on the
Well,
day they
that's-
were done? That kind of, I think
You know,
he didn't find enough specifics to put that out there and say, yes, that worked. But I will ask him that
Well,
question.
I'm curious.
It's a very
because
important question.
It is, because
There was also something you raised about 9D, which is, once you get north of Fair Street or south of the last intersection in Beacon, there's no other access to 9D. There's no cross sections, no crossroad. So it is literally the only north-south route between Beacon and Cold Spring. And if it is obstructed, as you're describing,
Yes.
it certainly presents a problem for the community.
I mean, it took it took 35 minutes to get to Beacon last October during baseball
The
season.
GEIS is that New York State Route 9D parallels the Fjord Trail corridor between the city of Beacon and the village of Cold Spring, and the area is served by major highways, including Interstate 84 and the Taconic State Parkway, providing convenient vehicle access to the area. But what that does ignore is that once you get off 84, the only way to get down here is on 9D.
Right.
Or once you get off the Taconic, the only way to get down here is 301. So there's really, and then once you're there,
Then it's
You're
a
there.
bottleneck,
It's a
because
bottleneck.
once you come from 84.
yeah, unless you're coming on the train, which is, a whole nother issue, yes.
Right,
And you
but
could get
then-
off and go down to Dockside and walk across and not walk on Fair Street.
Right, but the cars are there now, so I'm just curious, my concern for the community is that the cars are there now and we don't have this promenade. What is gonna happen when we have the giant concrete, in the river with all these cars there? That's my biggest concern as a part of the community.
Well, certainly from an emergency services standpoint,
Yeah,
that is an issue,
that's
because
the biggest
if there's
issue.
an accident halfway up on 9D, or a tree falls across the road or whatever, on a busy Saturday afternoon, that shuts down everything.
Not to mention if things are happening at Haldane, like if you have football or if you have a softball game, and then you have the community itself actually utilizing the roads.
Another traffic issue that came up is and not being the village of Cold Spring, but I think this is important for overall congestion in the area, is that, Dockside is being identified as the start of the trail. Now, people getting off the train will come up and across and get to Dockside on foot. People coming off the C Street, or whoever's coming in, whatever boat may be coming in, will get off and be able to get there. But other than that, anybody that's driving, it would not surprise me at all that they're gonna drive to Dockside and expect to find parking. And they're gonna get down there to Lower Main Street, and there won't be any, and everybody will try to get out. Eventually, they'll get over to the train station parking lot, but we have questions about, there's no significant parking study was done in order to say,
For the train
station, or for any of the existing parking lots, as to how full they are, at what time of year, and in what kind of weather conditions, et cetera. So that's a question we're asking also. But the train station, in my experience, is often even on a weekend, it's empty. It's not empty. There are spaces.
Yes.
But they're not all empty spaces. And I think they're counting on something like 400-plus spaces to be empty at the train station on the weekend. And, when we just went into the city on Saturday, we
Yeah.
parked at the train station.
Yeah.
So, locals that are going into the city are going to park there too and taking up spaces. So I think more information needs to be provided about how they came up with their numbers as to how many parking spaces are actually available.
Now, another question is the foot traffic. So those who come from the train, like Judy said, if they get onto that left, so the train comes up from the city, you're on the right, you go over the overpass and you're on the left. What is the foot traffic that is gonna go by all those people's homes, and what is their solution for that? I'm sure people didn't buy their houses for
Yeah, I
hundreds
mean,
of people to be walking
the tricky part
through their
about that is
backyard.
it is a public
Right.
thoroughfare. People, it's sidewalked,
Okay.
people can walk there.
Yeah,
it's-
no, I'm just
It is,
trying
it
to
is,
think of some of the
again,
questions.
from a community character aspect, it does change things.
There's
Lower
the
Main Street,
community character.
Lower Main Street will change
Yes. Mm-hmm.
especially on a weekend, for the people who live down there or work down
So
there.
instead of using Fair Street, you're gonna go West Street, basically.
West Street, North Street, and get to,
And what
past,
about
although Muumuus will love it.
Yeah.
It'll be great for Muumuus.
Well, there goes the community, the character of the community. It's why we are all living in this community. For
what
having it.
about the shuttles? I know that you made reference to the shuttles, but. is
Only
there
that they
any-
say there will be shuttles, that the existing trolley will be used. We just asked for a little bit more specifics about how that will be used, how will that be funded? Will the trolley now be on a regular schedule so that people know when it's coming and when it's not, so that, it'll be available to
Will it cost
the
money to get on
pedestrians?
the
Will it
trolley?
cost, historically, it was what, a dime to get on the trolley?
Now
When they
it's
started it.
I see
When they started, it was a dime.
I think it's missing an arrow.
Sometimes, that's what I'm saying. If you're gonna depend on the trolley as a means of getting people from the train station or bottom of Main Street or Little Stony Point to other locations, you need to have a schedule, and it needs to be on a semi-regular thing, and people need to know it's coming.
Since we're on the subject of traffic, parking, trolleys, can I just point us, and I just kind of want to make a suggestion. So on chapter 4L, you kind of do your summary of traffic and transportation.
Yep.
Growth and community character. And says the Hudson Highlands Fjord Trail, I numbered these, page 18. Hudson Highlands Fjord Trail will result in thousands of additional vehicle trips and a concomitant need for parking. The DGEIS points out that some additional parking is being provided, and traffic study documents claim that there will be no significant traffic problems. So I know that this discussion about parking and traffic has been a big concern. I know that in the DGEIS, it says that on some of their kind of studies of visitors, they expected, I believe this is right, 75% of visitors to arrive by car.
And from the south.
And from the south, so to this point, and then the Fjord Trail recommends, and I just wanted to list this, you know, they name a couple potential visitor demand management strategies, such as dynamic parking prices, where prices fluctuate and go higher on peak times, parking reservations, incentivized carpooling, timed entries to parking. And they discuss these in the DGIS as they could be employed where peak visitation exceeds the design day. So I guess my question would be, can the board, if we're so worried about people driving here, parking here, traffic, the DGEIS says that they expect 75% of visitors will drive here. Can we make a suggestion that from the start, we try to encourage public transportation as much as possible and deter driving by implementing some of those visitor demand management strategies such as dynamic pricing reservation system from the beginning? I mean, that's just a suggestion to say.
And it would be also ideal if, as you said before, if we could make a phase 5 and say, hey, look, if these conditions are bringing people north, are making people take the train, are parking in parking areas that are assigned, because you know it's gonna, when the parking lot's full,
Yeah.
if you're still planning a trip with your kids, you're gonna come up here and try to find a place to park. You're not just gonna stay home. So that's my concern. So if it can be, you know, proven to us that it is functioning, that, as Judy said, people are taking the train, and they're taking the train to Breakneck instead of taking the train to Cold Spring and not walking,
Yeah.
it could certainly, but we need to figure a statement that could address that. So we'll certainly have to extend this
Yeah, if
conversation.
anybody want to come up with suggested language, we can certainly incorporate that in there. One other important traffic question has come up, and I think needs to be, you know, more thought needs to go into it. They indicate that on a peak summer day, the traffic light at 9D and 301 already fails, or is close to failure. Or I think it's already failing, in terms of the amount of time you have to wait for the light to change and move through the intersection. They suggest then, therefore, that by adding 1,700 cars a day, it's already bad, so it's already bad. We can probably change the timing on the light so that north-south on 9D stays green longer so that more cars can get through. And one of the mitigation measures they suggest as possible, and I guess they have to deal with DOT on making that happen, is right and left turn lanes at that intersection, which, as you know, would take parking spaces away from the front of it's not Whistling Willie's anymore, I keep saying. Henry's, Peanuts on the floor.
Yes, of course.
Murphy's, the gas station on the other corner, Pete Farrell's house, how's that, you know.
And the church.
And we already have, as we know, you can't make a right turn heading north if you're going west on 9D, on Main Street. If you want to go into the village on Main Street, you can't make a right turn at Murphy's because there's no sight distance to the left. You
Right.
can't see. So, that's right, Pete's gonna have to move his house or part of his house anyway.
Tell them to pull back
So-
the brick wall.
So, you know, so that's a concern. They talk about eliminating parking spaces at that intersection in order to make right and left turn lanes available. And again, that's something they'll have to deal with DOT. But the other major mitigation they're proposing as possible is a roundabout at Little Stony Point, Washburn Lot, kind of Fair Street, where those intersections come, where that all comes together. And they suggest that as a possibility to keep traffic moving, but they don't give us a plan for how large that roundabout needs to be, how that would work. As you know, when you're there, if you're standing in the middle of 9D with Little Stony Point on your left and the Washburn Lot on your right, there's probably a 6 to 8 foot change in grade before you get up to that level area there where they're going to expand the parking lot. To the left, you have the Little Stony Point buildings, newly renovated or new buildings there, They don't give us an idea of how large that roundabout needs to be and if it's even feasible or not in terms of traffic mitigation. So that's another thing we think needs more investigation. Is they're going to put a roundabout.
There, you're still going to have traffic from the light coming down that hill.
The light is always going to be an issue.
Yeah, so the roundabout is kind of null and void because you're always going to have.
I guess more people get on Fair Street
Right.
and avoid the light.
And Fair
Like they
Street, it's
sneak through that
difficult navigating Fair Street with the pedestrians.
Oh,
And also
sure.
that stop sign, it's kind of dangerous, the stop sign
It's kinda
going
hard to-
towards 9D, exactly.
Yeah, right, to get out of there, yeah.
Yeah, the angle there is already bad.
And I know it's a village issue, but Fair Street's currently 2 ways. I mean, that's,
Well,
I
actually,
don't know,
that's
is there any
not- that's actually a
consideration?
county
I
road.
think Fair Street's a county road, yeah.
Past, you'll see where the blacktop is brand new. That's where the county,
At that point.
that's
it
where the
is.
county owns
That's
the
the
road.
county.
Right.
It's right by Tom Impel's house, if you're
Right.
familiar.
Does anyone have a better idea of what the plans for repairing Fair Street are? Because I haven't been keeping up to date with what's going on at Fair
Currently,
Street.
they're, we just approved not being the lead
I saw that.
agency.
I
They're
heard that,
going
yep.
to repair the pipes that are collapsed, that the parking has been closed.
Yep.
And I'm not speaking for the village, but this is my understanding. There's currently a 36-inch collapsed pipe that's there that takes all the stormwater on the north side of Main Street that comes down through the school, goes down by the apartments and out, and then it goes into the swamp. That's collapsed. So they're going to excavate and replace the 30-inch with, I think it's 2 40-inch pipes, and then regrade the parking lot and a new sidewalk. So
Is that going to be before baseball season?
hardly, yeah.
Just wondering
If they're just opening
what this
secret now, it's
trail
not going
looks
to be, yeah.
There's
Not this
sidewalk here
baseball
today.
season.
Yeah, not this baseball season.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, in general, we've hit kind of the high points. You know, we do have concerns about, again, in terms of biology and ecology and such, the work that's proposed in the river. Installation of the pilings is one significant issue, but also the locations, because they do identify these special aquatic vegetation areas in the river at that location, at several locations where the trail is proposed, and again, avoidance is one way to make sure that isn't an actual ecological impact to the river, so.
And I thought I read in the DGEIS that it would be, the aquatic life would migrate elsewhere. I mean, has that happened in other places along the river where there have been pilings?
They migrate elsewhere during construction, yeah, and then they would come back afterwards. But in terms of these aquatic vegetation areas, they make the statement that they'll get silted in while the work is going on, but a couple of seasons and the silt will wash away. But the vegetation is very sensitive, is the reason it's an area of concern in the first place. Once the silt is established and on those vegetative areas, generally they die back and don't recover. So, and mitigation in terms of planting, afterwards replanting those areas is spotty at best. I looked into the research on that, and the success of replanting the vegetative beds with wild celery or Zostra marina, I don't remember the eelgrass, it's spotty at best, the success of those areas.
This may be a question for Steve Gaba, Steve, but just another thing I noted in page 4A8, I'll just read the comment. You made the point that from the town's 2030 comprehensive plan, one of the goals of the town of Philipstown's 2030 comprehensive plan is to, quote, expand the town's capacity to meet current and future demand for recreation, end quote. To achieve the goal, the comprehensive plan identified the strategy of, quote, facilitating visual and physical access to the Hudson River by supporting the Hudson Highlands Fjord Trail project. So my question is just straightforward. That's in the town's 2030 comprehensive plan. How is the comprehensive plan supposed to relate to town board decision-making regarding the Fjord Trail south? Regarding the Fjord Trail, given that statement's in the comprehensive plan?
That's a Steve Gaba question.
Steve Gaba question?
Yeah.
Steve, yeah, the question.
Okay.
I mean, the comment, the response we have to that and the comment we make on that is that they identify it as meeting future and current demand for recreation, but then they do, for the town. But then they do make comment later on that population of the town between Cold Spring and Nelsonville and town of Philipstown has not increased over recent years, so I'm not sure what the expected future demand of parkland is, based on, in terms of responding to the comprehensive.
Tourism has increased, but the population of the residents have not increased.
So therefore, and the point I'm making is that therefore, recreational needs for residents of the town haven't increased. I mean, we have thousands of acres of open space.
I think also, too, I
That's what
could
we
be
need, is
wrong,
thousands of acres
Jason,
of
but the comprehensive plan, I think, might have been a little before it exactly when they were gonna start at Dockside.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think the plan itself
I
is
just want to
involved.
know.
Huh?
That section was written before.
Right.
Hold on.
So-
The plan has evolved dramatically since the comprehensive plan was
Yeah,
generated.
it was more a legal question, just how does it relate to that? That is in the comprehensive plan, how does it relate?
Right, so I
Is
mean,
the town going to be somehow tied to that?
Exactly, yeah.
I would like to suggest that we just table the discussion and continue it. You've made we've all made some great points. We need to generate a list of those. We can get them to you, Steve. Sure. Between now and next, we have 16 days to get this in by March 4th. So we can certainly put together our comments, get them to you via email, if that works. And then we can
And
come
they'll
back.
also coordinate with the conservation board, too.
Do you want them directly, or do you-
Emails from us might be not as.
Do you want the
streamlined.
comments directly, or would you rather them they go to the town clerk's office?
I just think if they go to the town clerk's office, she can put them in order and then just one email
Yeah,
instead
just one
of,
to you,
That is
instead of
five
getting
emails.
And then we can just
bombarded.
cut and paste in,
yeah, instead of
Yeah,
five
instead of
different,
coming up with a final
Getting
document.
emails from 5 different people,
yeah.
you know?
Again,
So we
and
will-
obviously, this is your document. My opinion's only based on experience, and I'm doing my best to not have opinions rather than ask questions. And so certainly it's your document, and if there are things
So-
you think I've missed or ways of expressing things that you would prefer, just, let us know.
So we will generate responses to Steve, or to Tara, then Tara will get them to you, Steve, and then by next Wednesday, we could meet again and come up with our final draft that would go into, does that work?
Yeah.
Yeah.
John, do you want us to flag which comments we don't agree with, assuming that the rest we agree with, so it's just everybody's?
Stick with what you don't, and you've made some great suggestions about phasing. I think
Okay.
that would be a good input, so. You guys good with that?
Yeah.
Yep.
You guys good?
We just gotta let Tara know she's gonna be getting them up.
Yeah, she's gonna be really happy. You just gave her a bunch of extra stuff to do.
Hi, Tara.
She may come through the door, sure. Then we're all in
The
trouble.
meeting is still young, so
It was Meg's idea, Tara, not mine, so.
I know how to smooth that over.
Does anybody
so-
else have anything for Steve?
No,
You guys
thank you.
good?
Thank you
That's
so
very
much.
thorough.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve, thank you. So if you guys are up to it, we'll get into the conservation boards. Andy, would you like to step up and give us an overview of what, I mean, it is several pages, but a lot of it is reference, so if you just want to,
So for brevity, I'm not going to go through anything that Steve didn't cover, because, what was done was extensive. So we went through also the draft environmental impact statement with a focus on not only pointing out areas that need to be looked at, and Steve covered just about everything, but also to give a point of view from the Conservation Board's standpoint. And what that point of view is that this would be the single biggest development project that has happened in 175 years. Being that the Hudson River Railroad, when it was built, it reached Garrison in, I think, 1850, and in Cold Spring a couple of years later. It was massive. Was the result good? Yes and no. On the whole, I would say yes. But we are a constricted town. There are 2 north and south routes, and they're both very small state roads. We only have one form of access that comes from the east, which is 301. And that, it's hairpin turns, it's exceedingly steep. So the Conservation Board, and then from the west, we're completely constricted. It's the river and the railroad tracks. So the Conservation Board is very, very concerned about traffic, both pedestrian and vehicle traffic. And while we're not experts on the traffic studies, a lot of them just don't seem to fully make sense, particularly in light of, if the southern section is being built And one of the recommendations within the draft statement is that the parking lot in Cold Spring is going to be used for cars. And that parking lot, I think, is identified as having 200 spots roughly. Think of the traffic that's going to bring in just on itself. So, our broad recommendation is to think about ending the trail, either by the tunnels or at the Breakneck train station, and then seeing what happens from there. Because we compared a lot of it to the data from Walkway on the Hudson, which now sees an annual 600,000 visitors a year. And the infrastructure in Poughkeepsie is far better than it is by us. We're also concerned about habitat. What Steve didn't bring up, but I bet you it's in the report on top of submerged vegetation, is what it is going to do to the sturgeon fishery, which is in collapse right now, and it's a threatened species. And while the numbers don't sound high in the amount of fragmentation that's going to happen, if you look at where it is, a lot of these areas are significant habitats. And, if we're saying, okay, we're going to cover 2 acres of the river with the boardwalk, it's only, 0.2% of the project. Well, it's a big area. It's a big area. We're also very, very concerned about the view shed. Steve brought up many points, but I'll go further. They talk about the trail being handicap accessible, which means the grade is almost non-existent. So what's very, very unclear within the DGEIS is what's going to happen on Little Stony Point. It appears like there's probably going to be structures that raise part of the trail. And that's, we have that referenced. It's very, very clear within that. The other thing that's not looked at is they do look at, what's the view shed from the west side of the Hudson? Well, that's Admiral. But what happens if you're a boater, a kayaker, a sailor? If you're midway in the river, it's going to vastly change the view. Now, one argument might be, it's partially artificial anyway from the railroad causeways. Indeed it is, but it's historic, it's been there. Then lastly, we go into trail maintenance. And perhaps one of the biggest problems overall is that state parks has done nothing to control the Hudson Highland State Park Preserve. State park preserves are designed for passive recreation. They are there, and particularly if you look at the comprehensive plan that was done for fawn stock in the Highlands, they're there to protect endangered and sensitive habitats. While state parks has done nothing to manage the trail system. I know that 2 of the members of the Conservation Board had recently gone on sections to look at it and were appalled at the condition. So, it's really a big overlying problem of how are they going to maintain that? How are they going to control traffic? And then we go one step further. The maintenance of the Hudson Highland Fjord Trail on the whole is going to, what's the word we want to use? Depend on a foundation to support it. Well, what happens if they can't raise the amount of funds they need to support it? And then anything that is not owned by state parks, and there are sections within the village of Cold Spring, within the town of Philipstown, with what's owned by the state, meaning DOT, the responsibility of that maintenance falls within the draft statement on those owners. So that's, we're really overlaying very much on the fine work that Steve and Tim Miller Associates did. But these are just a few details and other points that we were very, very.
Did the board unanimously vote on this statement
We
that you made?
basically, we put this together. We don't need to vote on it as a
Okay,
resolution.
because I hear
Yeah.
a lot of opinion. You started out
Right.
with saying where you think it
Well-
should stop.
Basically, that was a consensus to everybody that worked on it. One
So it
member,
was unanimous?
yeah, one member recused themselves, and one member was not available because of family problems, had a very sick
Because I did
father.
watch the video. I watched
Yeah.
the whole video
Yeah.
of the meeting.
So, And there was a working group that consisted of myself, 2 other members, our natural resource officer.
And Max was involved.
Yeah, Max, our natural resource officer.
Anything else, you guys?
No, I guess my only, Andy, I mean, thank you. I'm sitting on this conservation board meetings all the time. Conservation board is really made up of an excellent group of community members who do thorough work. So thank you for doing this. You know, I think the only, and I'm guessing, John, that this is just kind of an advising memo to the town board, right, giving their perspective?
Yeah, we have to come up with some plan to either attach it to Steve really, but Tim and Miller Associates, but Steve's plan, or, we could have the Conservation Board submit it themselves to the response of the DGIS. And that would be something that the board would have to decide.
Andy, you brought up the point that, that Parks hasn't done much to manage the Hudson Highlands State Park Preserve visitation over the last 20 years, and that's something everybody's living with and knows, right? And that's what I think causes a lot of people real concern about the Fjord Trail project. So I guess my question would be, it's not really, you have this statistic in here that, and this is more of a question that you may not have to the Fjord Trail, that 600,000 total annual visitors to the Fjord Trail is projected in 2028. So we're kind of all dealing with the idea of this trail bringing new visitors here, and that being part of the projection. And at the same time, we have, I think, and you cite this in one of the references, that in 2021, there were 480,000 visitors to the Hudson Highlands State Park Preserve without the Fjord Trail. And then you look at State Parks projections, and they project that without the Fjord Trail, that would grow to 780,000 by 2030. So over the next 6 years, State Parks is projecting a 200,000 visitor growth without any Fjord Trail. And so I guess my question is, one, there's just a detailed question to maybe Steve Marino, which I'll write up, which is, these 600,000 total annual visitors to the Fjord Trail that's in the DGEIS, is that in addition to these projections to the Hudson Highlands State Park Preserve? So that's one question. Are we looking at, 600,000 plus 784? That's one question. But then the second background is, the Fjord Trail is supposed to do some mitigation to these visitors. Like, that is part of the purpose of it. The parking lots, the meanders, these different things. And so, can we consider, if we do nothing and states leaves it as it is and we see 200,000 more visitors? I mean, it's not to the DGEIS to consider. What impact is that? Like, just leaving it totally as is and seeing this growth that we're all dealing with keep growing with no mitigation measures? What's the impact from that? It's not really for you to answer, but one was that, yeah.
No, okay, I can comment, though.
Go ahead.
One is, and we were trying to be polite, and we're not experts on traffic, but we feel that the estimates are low at best, and particularly on the traffic, because if you look at the different additions in the amount of cars, it's low, but we believe that as well. But what I didn't bring up is, we don't think that the draft environmental impact statement goes enough into the alternative routes. If you look at the appendices, they do, and you probably know this better than I do. I mean, because, within our memo, we're saying, okay, well, there are other alternative routes, and we throw two things, sort of mildly out of the box suggestions. One is, on weekends, close 90, on certain weekends and holidays, close 90 to traffic up to the tunnels. That's your trail. The other is, build a bike path, a handicap accessible path along the roadway there. I mean, these things have not been explored. And they've really sort of cherry-picked on the alternatives. So.
Thank you. And to address the projections, if you look at the ORCA numbers versus the data committee numbers with their expert opinion, it's a wide range. And you really need to look at those because there's a whole new group of tourists that they're projecting. And the other point, and actually Steve Gaba raised this in our discussion, if the state's investing this much money in this project, which obviously they're gonna have to, they're gonna advertise this as, you know, the crown jewel of the area, and it's gonna be, you know, that he feels the projections are gonna be way higher than what we've seen in any of these numbers. And again, this will go back to your phasing point, that if we had real data rather than projections and see what the advertising and what, you know, promoting the trail will be by New York State and where we end up with crowds. You know, and the point is, once it's built, they're not rolling it back. There's no way to roll it back, so. And I think that's a key point. We saw this, I don't know, I think you were on the board when there was one Facebook post about Indian Brook Falls, and then it went to the newspaper. We were towing hundreds of cars every weekend out of Indian Brook Road. We ended up having to, as you know, to close the lot at
Close the lot.
Constitution Marsh, and New York State finally came in and fenced it off with 8-foot fences. So, and that was one post, and no big investment in infrastructure or in advertising. We saw the results of that, and I think this could be 10 times worse, 100 times
Yeah,
worse.
but just that one,
Instagram post.
well, just only that, just, that really took away from the local people that could actually use the down there now, right?
The-
You can't get there. unless
The end
you got-
result is a detriment to the community, there's
Right.
no doubt
I
about it.
mean, you know, people used to.
I still get complaints about, I can't go to
Right, you
Constitution
can't go,
Marsh. but-
you can, but you
It's
gotta
taken away
find some
from
place to get
the
there besides a
community.
car.
Right.
You know,
Can I make one
unfortunately.
last comment? You know, state parks, 3 of their prongs are to preserve land, to provide recreation, and to get citizens to use the park. That's sort of the difficult problem. They're also underfunded. I mean, Bear Mountain State Park has not recovered from the rains that we had a year and a half ago. All the trails are closed. With that said, what we also bring up in the memo is, why did the trail system explode by Breakneck Ridge? It was we believe, the Conservation Board, it was the advent of trail apps combined by the use of social media showing selfies. And this is unfortunately only going to get worse, and it puts a tremendous strain on town resources, traffic, safety, and emergency services. So.
Challenge is, though, and I agree with that, but the challenge is, it's occurring now. So we don't have a plan, a tourist management plan. And this was meant to be, I thought, since I moved here over 20-something years ago, it was meant to be a way to mitigate part of that and provide some management of the people that are accessing the trails and people who might like to access them but can't because they're not for people with disabilities or people with young children. I have been to other communities where I see families walking on trails, or I see older people. And so that this is meant to be a way to try to mitigate that. But we have to we're dealing with over-tourism now, and there's no guarantee that with or without the trail, tourism is still gonna grow.
Well, and I agree with
So-
that, and I think, to Jason's point about phasing it, we could prove, we'd still be able to provide the river access and hopefully mitigate the over-tourism that's already existing. My feeling is, the crown jewel of that trail is dockside to Little Stony Point. And it will be its own tourist attraction. There's no doubt in my mind, and as much as I think it would be a beautiful asset to walk on it, to fish off of it, my fear is, that 10 million, 12 million people that are in this area will also have the same opinion and want to come and walk on it. So, and I just don't think that the size of Dockside or the community can handle that much more. We're already the #1 day hike in the country with Breakneck. We're already overburdened by the state of New York. I just don't see how we can facilitate hundreds of thousands of more people to this community every year, so.
I have one more question, which I don't know if one of you two might be able to answer. If not, you can find me the answer. Climate change and moving forward, like we've already witnessed catastrophic rains and winds within the area. So if this trail promenade goes up, like who's to say that a section of it doesn't get washed away in however many years, and then who's paying for it to repair it?
There are sections that talk about climate resiliency.
Okay.
Right, and you might want to speak to it better than I am, but essentially,
I knew one of you.
right, he can probably speak to overall climate resiliency, which seems to make sense. I, who have dealing with docks and what have you, I'm not sure how the structure would last without serious maintenance.
The forces that would be on it this winter with the amount of ice. If you drive by Little Stony Point right now north, the ice is piled up.
Well, the DGIS does mention that the pilings will be constructed in such a manner that the river ice won't affect them. Essentially, that's what it says. You know, again, we don't have the engineering details or sign off from an engineer saying that that's how, but that is an engineering problem, not an environmental problem, and I'm going to assume that they could build piers that would withstand the river ice.
I'm sure it's capable of
Okay.
being done.
The other question about the climate change and if I recall correctly, the GEIS says that the trail will be built 4 feet above the current mean high water, or however they describe it, the 100-year floodplain. It's 4 feet above that, anticipating river rise and higher, storm events and such. So they do mention that and consider that in their design.
Okay.
Just gonna make a last comment. Just-
Definitely.
and then I'm done.
Put that in my-
I'm done for the night. But this comment, Andy, is just to the Conservation Board in this memo, and again, all the due respect to the work you all did. I just wanted to kind of personally say that the recommendation you make that comes out of it, I don't agree with. The statement, hence the town of Philipstown Conservation Board requests that the Hudson Highlands Fjord Trail as planned terminates at Breakneck Ridge and does not attempt to enter Philipstown. And obviously the Conservation Board has their own perspective, independent agency, but the idea of just stating that it terminates there as opposed to the plan Supervisor Van Tassel suggested about pausing at Little Stony Point and looking at real data, I just think that a lot of community members, we could lose the benefits of an amazing park in our community at that point and get the negatives still at the same point. And so I just wanted to put that on record that I wouldn't support something that said the position of terminating at Breakneck as opposed to looking at real data and then determining if it should come all the way into Cold Spring, which I think a lot of community members would want and would benefit a lot of people in the community. So I just wanted to, yeah.
I had the same feeling. I was just surprised by that, as I expressed earlier, by that statement. I don't know how it was arrived at based on facts, because we're clearly saying we need more facts. So I think it was putting the cart before the horse, but I do appreciate you taking the time to review the DGIS.
I'm just going to quickly say, I'm not going to voice my personal views on this. I'm going to voice the views of the constituents within the community. I appreciate you guys' reports, and I'm hoping that we can come to some type of conclusion to move forward to make sure that everybody in the community is satisfied, so.
Right, so if it's all right with the board, it's nearly 9 o'clock, we can wrap up for tonight, and we'll come back next Wednesday. I know there's court next Wednesday. So look, if we cannot move court next Wednesday, or it will not be finished in time, we will probably move to the rec center. We'll probably have the rest of the meeting at the rec center. In the meantime, the plan is that we will put together items that will go to Steve, and then we can.
Tara?
Sorry, poor Tara. So the emails will go.
One big email.
Right, the emails will go to Tara, and then Tara will stack them all up and send them to Steve for final review next Wednesday night. All right, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. And I vote aye.